Hey you guys, in this section we're going to be talking about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Okay, so before we get into some examples, let's get into the steps. So when solving an equation using the quadratic formula, first the equation needs to be in the following form. ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, this is also called standard form. Okay, so the following are the steps. Step 1 is to identify a, b, and c. Step 2 is to replace them in the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then step 3 is to solve. Okay, so when you are using the quadratic formula, it is important that you put your equation in standard form so that you can properly identify what your coefficients A, B, and C are. Once you have identified those coefficients, this is simply plug and chug and get your answer. Okay. Another important thing about the quadratic formula is that it always works. Okay. So you don't have to worry about what your form looks like or anything like that. It always works. So previously, we've talked about factoring, we've talked about the square root method, completing the square, and now this method. And of those four methods, completing the square and the quadratic formula always work. So if you ever get stuck, this is probably going to be one of your go-tos. All right, now let's look at our first example. So our first example says solve using the quadratic formula, and we have 3x squared minus 8x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, so step 1 was to always make sure that your problem was in standard form, which it is. Okay, and then step 2 is to identify A, B, and C. Okay, so in this problem, okay, A is equal to 3, B is equal to negative 8, and C is equal to 4. Okay, so we're going to plug those values into the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so I'm going to plug my numbers into that. So I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times 3 times 4 all over 2 times 3. Okay, we're going to simplify everything. So a negative times a negative is positive, plus or minus. All right, negative 8 squared is 64. Okay, and then we have negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12. And negative 12 times 4 is negative 48. And then all of that is over 6. Okay, we're going to simplify that number that's under the radical. 64 minus 48 is going to give us 16 over 6. Okay, we're going to simplify that some more. So we have 8 plus or minus. The square root of 16 is 4. And all of that is over 6. Okay, so that actually gives us two answers. We have 8 plus 4 over 6. And we have 8 minus 4 over 6. So we're going to simplify both of those. So for the first one, 8 plus 4 is 12. And 12 divided by 6 is 2. And for the second one, we have 8 minus 4, which is 4 over 6. And 4 over 6 reduces to 2/3. Okay, so our two answers are x equals 2 and x equals 2/3. Okay, cool. Let's look at the second example. All right, so for this example, we have the same steps. Solve using the quadratic formula. So step 1 is to make sure that our problem is in standard form. It is. All right, step 2 is to identify what A, B, and C are. Well, A is 1. Okay. B is negative 1. And C is negative 5. Okay, and we're going to plug that into the quadratic formula, which says x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so we're going to plug that in. All right, so that's going to give me x equals negative b plus or minus negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5 all over 2 times 1. And I'm going to simplify that. So a negative times a negative is positive. Negative 1 squared is 1. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And negative 4 times negative 5 is positive 20. Okay. And then all of that is going to be over 2. So I'm going to simplify. That's going to be 1 plus or minus the square root of 21 over 2. Okay. The square root of 21 doesn't break down any farther. All right. So we just need to remember that we have two answers here. 1 plus the square root of 21 over 2 and 1 minus the square root of 21 over 2. Okay. And those are our two answers. Awesome.